Please be advised this episode contains discussions about sensitive topics, including sexual assault and domestic violence. Hello everyone, on today's episode of the Cincy Lawcast, we have Kristie Bluett, Associate Professor of Clinical Law and Director of the Domestic Violence and Civil Protection Order Clinic at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. She will be here to talk to us about the DV Clinic and answer some questions about the services they provide. Welcome, Kristie. Would you like to give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure. So this is my third year at the University of Cincinnati College of Law running the Domestic Violence Clinic. I have a background in litigation and about a decade working in the human rights field, including that I taught the International Women's Human Rights Clinic at Georgetown Law for 3 years. So my work with the Domestic Violence Clinic is really a blend of my past experience.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into what the Domestic Violence Clinic is. So can you explain to me what the Domestic Violence Clinic does and the services it provides?
Sure. And also I should have said thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you doing this during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I think it's a really important message to get out there about what the services are in the community, so thank you. The University of Cincinnati Domestic Violence Clinic is one of 7 legal clinics offered here at the College of Law. We essentially serve 2 missions. One is providing experiential legal education to upper-level law students, and at the same time providing quality legal services to survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault. We operate in 2 courts in Hamilton County, the Domestic Relations Court and also the Court of Common Pleas. And in most cases, we're assisting the survivor in obtaining a civil protection order. Through the clinic, it's actually the law students who are conducting the hearings, conducting the fact investigation, meeting with clients under the supervision of a licensed attorney. But it really gives law students that first opportunity to be really hands-on in providing legal services and to working with survivors of trauma.
Well, that's amazing work. How many clients can the clinic assist, and what is the typical scale of the clinic's operations?
We only operate during the academic year. So at the beginning of each semester, there is a little lag time while new legal interns get trained, where we're not accepting cases. But generally between September and April or May, we receive about 45 to 50 referrals per year. We have the capacity to take on full representation in, I'd say, roughly 6 cases per semester, so 12 per year. It's a very intense process between going from interviewing, fact investigation, preparing all parts of the trial, and usually that has to be done in like 1 to 2 weeks. So it's a lot of, it's a steep learning curve for the students who are engaging in this work. So that's part of the reason why that is limited, because you don't have very experienced lawyers who have done this over and over, right? But for all the rest of the cases that get referred to us, we provide a brief consultation where we explain the process and the law. We talk about what evidence they may have to support their case, and we give them an opportunity to ask questions. So we do try to provide some assistance on some level to everyone that's referred to us.
Well, that's awesome to hear, and that's great to see that we can prepare these students to assist these people along their educational pathway. Understanding a civil protection order, what is a civil protection order and what does it do?
A civil protection order, and just thank you for referring to it as that, and just for listeners, to make it clear that that's intentional, that we're talking about civil protection orders. There might be a coinciding criminal case, and there could be a restraining order involved in that case, but this is a separate thing. It's separate from a criminal trial or a criminal charge. So a civil protection order is really intended to prevent future violence by an abusive party. They typically will contain a standard stay-away order. On ours, it's usually that the offending party can't be within 500 feet of the protected person or persons. They're prohibited from going to the person's work, residence, business. They're prohibited from contacting the protected person in any way, whether that is by phone, email, social media, and they also can't direct somebody else to do it. So these are the typically what you see in a protection order. It will contain these kind of core provisions. But it can also include things like temporary parenting orders. If a child is included as a protected party, it can require the offender to turn over any weapons for the duration of that protection order. So they really can have a big effect. There's a lot that they can cover. And with civil protection orders, they can last up to 5 years. So again, even if there's a coinciding criminal case, that protection order related to that might drop off. Maybe the case doesn't go to trial. Maybe there's a plea for a certain period of time that's less than 5 years. So it's beneficial, I think, for individuals to get a civil order, even if they have something going on the criminal side. The thing about protection orders in terms of what they can do is that there's no one really monitoring compliance, right? They can't just say, okay, you're violating it the same way that we're violating a speed limit. So it's really up to the protected party to make sure that it's enforced. So this means that and I'm saying offending party, but it's technically called the respondent. So the respondent, the offended party, if they're driving by their house, if they're calling, texting, showing up at work after this order is in effect, it's up to the protected person to call the police so that order can be enforced. And another benefit of having this type of order is that a violation of even a civil protection order is actually a criminal offense. So again, it can carry a lot of weight in the legal system, and it can afford a fair bit of protection.
Who can get a civil protection order?
So actually, I'd say a broader category of individuals can receive a civil protection order than probably a lot of people think about. For a domestic violence civil protection order, which is heard over at the Domestic Relations Court, someone can apply for a protection order if they are related to the offending party by blood or marriage, and they've lived together with them at any time. If somebody is cohabitating, or I believe the language in the statute is that they're living as a spouse, and that they're living with or have lived with the person during the last 5 years, they can seek an order. If two people have a shared child in common, regardless of whether they've ever been married, ever lived together, those can all be heard over at the Domestic Relations Court as a domestic violence protection order case. The domestic violence statute also now encompasses provisions for dating violence in the civil context. So the statute governing civil protection orders for domestic violence. So this means that it can be two individuals who have had a romantic, intimate relationship, have been dating as long as they've been dating within 12 months of the conduct in question. There is an added layer of what they would need to prove. They just need to establish enough to show that they meet that relationship requirement, but dating violence can be handled there as well. And I think that's one that people often forget about. They hear domestic relations court, they think it needs to be two spouses, and that's just not the case. If the relationship or household requirement for a domestic relations court aren't met, and someone is a victim of stalking or sexual assault, they can also seek a protection order, but that's just going to be heard in a different court. That's heard over at the main courthouse. And I do want to mention that civil stalking, aggravated trespass, child abuse, and sexually oriented offenses can also all be considered forms of domestic violence and heard in the domestic relations court if that relationship or household requirement is met, or the dating relationship. So domestic violence, in some ways it's defined to include physical violence or threats of physical violence, but also these other statutes are referred to within that definition of domestic violence. So it also is broader, I think, than what some people might think as well.
So if someone feels that they fit into one of these categories and wants to obtain a protection order, where do they go to file that?
For the domestic violence or dating violence protection orders, residents of Hamilton County should go to the Domestic Relations Court. That is located at 800 Broadway. Go to the third floor. That's where the docket office, the clerk's office are. You can fill it out there yourself. For those who need to file in the Court of Common Pleas, so if they don't meet those various relationship requirements that I mentioned previously, that's in the Court of Common Pleas located at 1000 Main Street, and the clerk's office again is located on the third floor, but also in that court, as you enter, basically, or right after you enter, is also a help desk, and that can provide assistance to people who don't know what form to use, don't know where to go, that kind of thing. If somebody makes it over to domestic relations court and gets up to the third floor, they can ask a few questions to the docket office, about procedure or that kind of thing, but there's also they have handouts from Women Helping Women, which is an organization that I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And they have a number on there that somebody can call. So if they're not comfortable filling out that paperwork by themselves, they can contact Women Helping Women first, and someone from that organization can help them fill out that initial paperwork.
What are the first steps someone should take if they need that help? And again, what are some of those community organizations that can provide support?
Great question. So I would recommend as a first stop Women Helping Women, the organization that I mentioned earlier. Despite its name, Women Helping Women actually help all survivors. That's not just in Hamilton County. They do work with survivors here in Hamilton County. They also work in Butler County, Adams County, Brown County. And I say to start with them because Women Helping Women really provides a wide variety of services to survivors of, again, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, sexual offenses. And their services include safety planning. And for a first step, that's often what a survivor needs. If they are looking to leave the situation, but it's going to be dangerous for them. If they don't have anywhere to go when they leave the situation. Women Helping Women is really great at all of that. They have a lot of really experienced advocates. They also have advocates who can accompany somebody to court proceedings, not just in the civil cases, but also for the criminal cases. They have counseling that people can attend. So I would suggest that. They're a very respected organization within Cincinnati, within the county. And they also have a 24-hour hotline, which I hope they don't mind. I'm going to go ahead and drop on this podcast, which is 513-381-5610. So if somebody is a survivor of domestic violence and they need assistance, I do encourage them to reach out to that hotline. But even if somebody doesn't go to them first, like I said, somebody can go directly to the courthouse and file that their hearing at the domestic relations court will be likely heard that day. They can get the flyer for Women Helping Women there and get connected with them for their next hearing. Women Helping Women also often has an advocate physically at the courthouse on some days. I don't know their schedule, but they might be able to find somebody to sit with them right there and help with the paperwork. So that is what I would suggest for kind of first stop.
Awesome. So we've heard about kind of the community support in those organizations. Are there any legal changes that have been made recently to help protect individuals facing domestic violence or any of these categories that kind of fall under this protection order?
There have been. I think as a lot of people know, Ohio is not at the forefront of protecting women or protecting women's rights. So we've actually been really late to the game in terms of some of the legal changes that are necessary to protect survivors. But some of those are that in 2023, Ohio finally made strangulation a felony offense. It was the last state in the United States to do so. But this is pretty huge for domestic violence survivors. I was reading something earlier today that according to the Domestic Violence Division in the Columbus City Attorney's Office, in 2018, roughly 20% of domestic violence cases involved strangulation or suffocation. I think getting a conviction on felony charges is another thing, but at least now the law is there to allow for that. Earlier this year, I think it was in May, the Ohio legislature finally closed a loophole in Ohio's rape laws that previously excluded many forms of marital rape from being a crime. So again, we are pretty late to the game in this. There has been a shift since around 2019 of a lot of states closing these marital exceptions, and Ohio finally did in May. And I want to also mention a couple changes in practice. I know the question was about legal changes, but there have also been recent changes. And like I mentioned, this is my third year here, so these have all happened since I've been here, including the changes of practice. And for this, I really want to give a shout out to the Domestic Violence Task Force that was created, I think it was in January or February of this year, but some months ago, by Sheriff Charmaine McGuffey and Judge Ann Flotman. And this has brought together kind of all players in the county that touch on this. So there's people from Women Helping Women, from the prosecutor's office. I think a forensic nurse has been brought in. There are magistrates who come to the table, probation, kind of every aspect that's touching on domestic violence issues. It brings them together to talk about more systemic issues. So I think what prompted it was gaps in service, failure to, trying to find a way, I guess, to have better service. But it's actually led to a lot of changes, particularly in the domestic relations court, that I think have made that court more survivor friendly. So one of the things that Judge Flotman, who's now the administrative judge over there, they have extended the hearing times. So there used to be a cutoff, I can't remember the exact time, but it was around 2 or 2:30. I think they're now hearing protection order cases until 3:30. And the idea behind extending the hours that the court would hear cases is that there are a lot of reasons why somebody might not make it down to court the next day. So I think they have had a bit of an uptick in their cases since then. So that's a positive change. Not that the fact that there's more cases, but the fact that the court is making an effort to hear those people that need their cases heard. They also have returned to a specific DV docket. So they now have 4 magistrates who their docket is dedicated at least primarily, but I'd say almost exclusively, to domestic violence cases. I know Judge Flotman has really been encouraging, kind of training for those magistrates to make sure that they are trauma informed, that they understand the dynamics of domestic violence. And I mean, from our limited experience, because they see hundreds of cases every month, we have a few cases every month. I would say even I have already seen the changes that have taken place. There was a period of time where I felt like we'd get out of a hearing and I was apologizing to our clients for how they were treated in the courtroom. And I don't feel that now with the magistrates that are sitting on this specialized docket and the changes that have been put in place. I do think it has become a more survivor-friendly court, and I think that there can't be enough said about that. So that is just one thing that I also wanted to say. In this county in particular, there is this big push right now to try to, see where the system is failing survivors and make changes.
Are there other organizations working alongside the DV clinic to support individuals needing broader assistance?
There are a lot. And I want to caveat by saying I am sure I'm going to leave somebody off this list, but these are some of the key organizations here in Hamilton County that survivors of domestic violence or other sexual or physical violence can turn to if they need assistance. So, I've already mentioned Women Helping Women, which provides a lot of services. The range is, I'm sure, more than even I mentioned earlier in this podcast. There's also YWCA. They also provide court advocates, can assist with finding housing or other aspects of what a survivor going through this might need. Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. These are all really important players. They're all helping survivors achieve their rights or realize their rights. The latter two also, in some instances, can provide or refer to legal assistance. On the lines of legal assistance, there are so many unrepresented survivors in our court and not enough legal options. I know you asked about other services, but I do also want to mention the legal aid providers as well. And one is the Legal Aid Society here located downtown. They, again, like us, they provide legal assistance for low-income survivors seeking protection orders. But beyond that, they also have a broader family and immigration law group. So a survivor might have a need that falls outside of a civil protection order. Maybe they need assistance in a divorce. Maybe they need assistance in a custody matter or an immigration matter. Legal aid handles all of these types of cases. For us here at UC, my clinic just handles the civil protection order side of it, but we also have another legal clinic, the Legal Access Clinic, which can assist in these other types of matters, whether it's immigration, custody, divorce. So we'll often refer among each other as well, because often our clients have overlapping needs. So I'd say those are some of the key ones that people can turn to if they are trying to get assistance.
Understanding a civil protection order, I'm assuming confidentiality is extremely important. So why is confidentiality so important with the work that the DV clinic does?
Well, as a general matter, confidentiality is so important in domestic violence cases because we're often speaking with people about the most intimate and sensitive details of their lives. Sometimes the worst parts and worst insights into their lives. And so it's really important that survivors feel comfortable sharing that with us. The cases, particularly in domestic relations court, move very, very quickly. So we might have to talk to somebody about a very violent episode of abuse or a forced sexual encounter in our very first meeting with them. So, establishing rapport and providing a comfortable situation where the person knows that not only that the information they share is going to be confidential, but also that they're not going to be judged, that they're not going to be blamed. These are also important to help someone, get through this process. For us, beyond the general confidentiality concerns, as lawyers, we also have an ethical obligation to keep communications with clients confidential, right? So, particularly where we are actually engaging in full representation, all of those communications are going to be protected by attorney-client privilege, and we repeatedly make it clear to the people that we work with that everything they share with us will be kept confidential unless we have their explicit permission to share it for some reason.
This has been a very insightful podcast, and I hope our listeners have learned something and they can use this as a resource in the future if needed. How can our listeners support the Domestic Violence Clinic or the other groups that you listed here today?
Well, I think that every legal aid organization in this area, probably the biggest need is going to be financial. I know that both my clinic and the Legal Access Clinic here at UC provide our services free of charge and operate on very tight budgets. So if individuals or organizations or firms are interested in supporting the continuation or growth of these clinics, they could donate to our operations. One of the ways that this funding is really important is that right now both of these clinics are operated with one person supervising the students. So even if you have 6 different students working on cases and they can be juggling these cases throughout the semester, if you only have them funneling through one supervisor who needs to oversee something, obviously that's limited. A lot of legal clinics like this have either a staff attorney or a law fellow who is also heavily involved in the clinic work. They're teaching, with the faculty member in the course, and they are also supervising. And so, the benefit of a fellow is that they are also in line with the pedagogy that goes along with clinical teaching. So there is a process, there's a lot of reflection involved as students are kind of building themselves into lawyers through this process. And so I think just having the ability to fund a second body in these clinics would really go a long way, because you could probably double the work, right? Beyond that, though, I think being a witness and a support person to anyone going through a domestic violence or dating violence situation is equally important. Statistically, most of us know someone who is a survivor of physical or sexual violence. So I think if someone comes to you, just believing them, giving them a safe space to share, then encouraging them to reach out to one of the entities that I've mentioned here on the podcast. I think that can also go a far way for supporting domestic violence survivors and other survivors of physical or sexual violence in our community.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down for this. For anyone who is interested in these organizations, they will be linked in the episode description, so feel free to click on those and learn more about them on your own time and see where you might be able to assist. Again, thank you for sitting down and talking to us about such an important matter, and I hope this podcast can be used as a resource for someone in the future.
Thank you for having me.